Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today for our first session of 2025 and the sixth season of the PMA-CIBC Summit Series. Everyone here at PMA Brethour is so grateful to each of you for your strong support to keep this program fresh every single month for the last 5 years, and we're on 6. If you have content ideas or suggestions, or you'd like to participate in the program, please reach out to us. So welcome, my name is Chris Markovic on behalf of PMA Brethour, CIBC, our title sponsor, and our media partner, McEwitt. We are thrilled to all have you join us this morning. The world's changing and Ontario is changing with it. Today, Andy and our panel will tackle the pressing challenges of the province's financial climate and how it could impact Ontario and the Canadian real estate today on Election Day, as a matter of fact. From tariffs to politics and beyond, we'll see what's in store for the first half of this year. I'll introduce our panel. We have Dave Wilkes, President and Chief Executive Officer at BILD, Leor Margulies, Partner and Head of Development and Real Estate Lending Services at Appleby LLP, and Tim Hudak, Partner and Chief Executive Counsel Public Affairs, Inc. I'll come back on at the end of the session to wrap up our session and go through any questions, the Q&A session. So if you have questions, please put them into the chat room and we will do our very best to cover them. So over to you, Andy.
Thanks so much, Chris, and welcome to David, Leor, and Tim. It's great to be with you this morning. Real estate hates uncertainty. And we are in perhaps one of the most uncertain times or periods that we've ever experienced. I'm not going to reflect or even mention some of the sales data that we're experiencing across the GTA. It's just abysmal, worse since the recession of the early 90s. So we're facing challenges that we've never experienced before. Uncertainty leads to confusion. Confusion creates inaction. And that's exactly where we are. It reminds me of that great quotation by the renowned boxer, our good friend, Mike Tyson, who said, you can have the perfect plan, an absolutely sensational strategy until someone comes along and punches you right straight in the face. And that's exactly what's happened. I call it the Trump thump. You know, it's not new though. The Trump thump isn't new. In 1854, the US Congress passed the Reciprocity Act, targeting what was then the British North America, and the fledgling didn't exist as provinces yet, really targeting the Hudson Bay Company and the transfer of furs, fish, lumber, other goods and services, goods mainly, into the US. And a free trade agreement was created in 1854. It lasted till 1866, and right in that period was a civil war. That civil war, 1861 to 65, the British supported the South. The South was all uptight when the war ended that they'd be overwhelmed by the northern states, and any agreement with Canada would just strengthen the North. And so Congress canceled the Reciprocity Act in 1866. And guess what happened in 1867? Canada became a country. And why did it become a country? Because suddenly it thought it would be swallowed by this great elephant to the south, the United States. And has this not been part of our history, part of our incredible journey together for 171 years? It's really quite remarkable. You can go back and through and study all of the trade agreements that have occurred through this period. It's really quite fascinating. But certainty is delivered by resolution. And resolution happens with specific dates. Well, we got one today. You have a provincial election. How do we get rid of uncertainty is in a period of elections is quite simple, and vote in the direction you want to take for sure, in Ontario. I'm sure Tim and our panelists, David and Leor, will have some commentary about that. March the 9th is when we have a new prime minister, not just a new Liberal leader of the Liberal Party, but a new prime minister after the last one abandoned ship in the midst of this great uncertain time. So quite a remarkable transition about to happen just in the matter of another week or so. On March the 12th, the Bank of Canada sets in its new interest rate policy. So in the midst of all of this going on around us here, suddenly Bank of Canada is its regularly scheduled date for interest rates. We expect to see another quarter-point reduction, although there's been lots of talk about it remaining stable. March the 24th is another key date to remove uncertainty when Parliament must be recalled. And there's much speculation that it won't be recalled, that in fact, Prime Minister Carney is perhaps greater advantaged in the surge of euphoria of a leadership convention to call an immediate election as opposed to wait. And in fact, the longer he waits, or if he recalls Parliament, he has to rely upon the uncertainty of his partner in Jagmeet Singh. So the likelihood is that he calls one right away. It could happen within the week of the 16th, and an election happening 45 days later. That would put it somewhere between May 1 and May 12th. There's my bet. I'll love to hear from the other panelists on that. And then the next key component date is April 1st, April Fool's Day of all days. And the person you're going to hear a lot from, you're going to learn to love or hate, is Howard Lutnick. Who the heck is Howard Lutnick? Howard Lutnick is the new Commerce Secretary for the United States, and he is the king of tariffs. And he, on April 1st, is reporting back to Trump with his reciprocity review of the world and all of the tariffs that exist in the world circumstances with the United States. And will then begin to set policy of how they deal with the tariff scene from that point on. It's why you've had deferral until that time in terms of any decision making. But it'll be an important date. Now, Lutnick himself is, if you haven't heard of him before, he's former chairman of Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald you would have heard of from the period of 2001, 9/11. Where 658 of their employees, 68% of their New York office were lost in the collapse of the North Tower. They started Lutnick wasn't there that day, but his brother was, his younger brother was, and he was lost. And they started the amazing charitable process, raising, $200 million from one commitment of profits to another of their annual charity day, an additional $200 million that is now distributed to those in distress or emergencies in the United States particularly, but mainly to its own employees who had suffered through that great loss. So the man at least has a tremendous heart, I think, although he knows nothing about tariffs and admits he was on the news just the other night. He didn't know anything about it until Trump asked him to serve. So there's a great learning curve going on within the administration, I think, on the impact of tariffs itself, which is part of the confusion. So what you have now is April the 2nd is kind of Trump Day, and where we'll hear this next Trump thump occur and whether in fact tariffs will happen or not. What's the objective here? What is the actual end goal? Well, that's been probably one of the most difficult things to ascertain or even pull into the sphere of influence. But bluster and bombast from Trump draws your attention, but it may not be his intention. In other words, his bombast can be outrageous. It deflects your focus, where his intent is quite specific in another direction. His underlying intention is $36 trillion in debt. $36 trillion where their funding of that debt is greater than defense spending. And if you look across history, any country that has suffered through greater debt coverage than defense spending generally goes broke, and calamity follows. So the repayment or the down payment of that debt is really what he's getting at. And how's he going to do it? Well, he cuts expenses, Musk. He cuts taxes, their own tax portfolio, plus the 15% to corporations that would move back to the US. Very powerful motivation. The $5 million gold standard. I can see Leor counting his chips right now, ready to become a US citizen. 200,000 are on the waiting list. At $5 million a pop, that's $1 trillion. Goes right to the bottom line of cutting debt. And then finally, the fourth element of that is tariffs. So tariffs imposed upon countries around the world returns dollars to the US Treasury and reduces debt. Well, that's his objective. So how does that affect us here in Canada? One, USMCA, US-Mexico-Canadian Free Trade Agreement. It's to be negotiated in 2026. I think this gets renegotiated much sooner. In fact, it would be a significant opening of such to get that into play right away rather than wait. That may not necessarily defer tariffs, but it certainly puts it into a realm of the open air areas of discussion and what might come from that. Our marketing boards are at risk. Our 3% digital sales tax at risk. Our HST at risk. Lumber stub fees at risk. Dumping of steel. By the way, when Trudeau took power in 2015, about less than 19% of steel that was delivered to the US was dumped here from other countries, from South America, from Europe, from Japan, from China. Today, that's exceeded 40%. So you can see where the Trump reaction is to some of these situations. It was never monitored and never dealt with. So you've got this trade deficit estimated at $200 billion between the two countries. And in fact, it's less than 60, and some estimated in the $40 billion mark. And what Trump does is elevate that number to include defense, because he looks upon Canada as defenseless. You know, Russia and China are layering a flag across the Arctic soil or ice, as the case may be. And in fact, our singular submarine is in dry dock. So where Trump's exaggeration of the deficit is really, I think, as much about defense. NATO spending 1.3%. We're the laggard of 32 countries. We should be committing to the 2 or even more, as Germany just did, in committing to 3 and 4 and 5% of GDP. These are areas that will attract Trump's attention. We already addressed border. It's time overdue. The Arctic is a serious security issue, and one that perhaps needs a joint military base in Tuktoyaktuk or something like that, or at least an expression of how do we protect that Arctic ring. US-Canada trade is a partnership. It's not the enemy. I think Trump is recognizing this partnership. You know that 78% of our trade between Canada and it goes from Canada into the US. So we've become very reliant on the big elephant to the south. But an more important stat is that 66% of that trade is called intermediary. That means it flows back and forth across the states to Canada and back and forth again before it becomes an actual good that gets imported into the US. In fact, it never does. It becomes a US-based good. And as a result, it has this intermediary function. It's a partnership. And this partnership has been going on since 1854. In fact, of course, the Auto Pact of 1964 is when the main auto element worked, but aerospace, technology, you name it, this intermediary functionality of business between the two countries is so intertwined as to be a complete partnership. So if Trump puts 25% on automotive as a tariff, he immediately raises the price of an F-150 Ford pickup truck by $9,000 to the US. Well, I just don't think that happens. If he puts 10% or greater on our oil is sitting there, the other 34% of goods that we actually do send to the US that are imported, the great majority of that in oil and gas, that's bought at 70 cents on the dollar, discounted by 15% because it's heavy oil. The Americans refine it and sell it back to us at a profit. How remarkable is that? And it keeps the price of oil, in fact, lower. Last week, he said, I'm going to renew the double XL pipeline debate or discussion. Well, you're talking out of both sides of the mouth in this case. if I put a tariff on our oil, but at the same time, I want to encourage greater supply. The Americans consume 19 billion barrels of oil a day. They only produce 13. That shortfall of 6 billion barrels, 4.5 billion of it comes from Canada every single day through the existing XL pipeline. So we could actually have a better partnership, a greater partnership with the United States if in fact this was some of the route we go. And there's my final point about this whole discussion. Because we're such in a partnership, shouldn't we be thinking about how we exploit this to a greater degree and create a North American economic powerhouse that expands the relationship between the countries? You can read oodles on free trade agreements throughout the centuries with Canada and the US and how we have prospered both tremendously because of it. And every time you've seen tariffs imposed like they were in the 1920s, what was the end result but severe depression? And it's been proven time and time and time again. So let's find a way to maximize our return between the two countries. Trump's looking for a better deal. Let's perhaps find a way to give him one. Now, it's a first half, second half year for real estate. The first half is full of this uncertainty. The consumer's sitting on his hands. He's not taking action. The building development industry is nervous, concerned, not going to pour money into the ground and proceed. The investor has disappeared from the high-rise environment. So here we sit in a very uncertain time, and that's going to continue through the first half. That's going to be the story right through, I'm afraid, till April the 2nd, or at least until we actually have a federal election here in May, and new leadership takes on a new direction for us, and the uncertainty begins to fade away. So I think it's a first half, second half year. Reduction in immigration is still very, very strong, but it does come off dramatically, particularly for students. Rental rates are coming down, becoming more affordable. How do we manage that going forward into the second half of the year? Interest rates continue to come down. Bond yields are coming down. What we're feeling is I think, early 4% 5-year fixed rates by the fall. And you may see Bank of Canada at 2.25, even as low as 2, depending upon how sluggish our economy is. So it's a first half, second half year with a second half recovery on the horizon, and very opportune actually, because the pent up demand at the moment is enormous. The theme of what we're going to talk about right now, and I'm going to stop, take too much time as always, but is what I've called de-zone, deregulate, de-tax, and develop. In other words, you've already seen great progress on the de-tax file from Dave Wilkes in particular, and BILD with DCs. I'm going to stop there and fire this back now to our panel. So I've kind of set that stage. Dave, let me start with you. What are you telling your members? How are you feeling about the Trump thump and where we are at this moment?
Thanks, Andy. As always, I'm always grateful to participate in these discussions and looking forward to doing so with two of my great colleagues in this industry, Tim and Leor. So thank you for the opportunity. You said a number of things there, Andy, that I agree with. Uncertainty is the enemy of investment, but in this particular case, I think uncertainty is also not only causing the investment in our industry to be stalled, but we're also, and what I hear from the members is that just one of the reasons that the sales numbers are so historically low, because people are just scared. People are uncertain about their future, and as such, the willingness to make a big investment, which a new home is just not there now. So the sooner that we get to that stability of outlook, both from a domestic point of view and a Canada-US point of view, I think that's going to be a key thing. It is an overriding thing in the conversations I currently have with the members, that uncertainty is really defining and determining almost everything within the market right now. But you also said something interesting that I'll offer a bit of a different perspective on first half, second half here. I worry that the current focus on the uncertainty caused by the geopolitical issues is distracting us and can't distract us from the necessary changes we need to make to return to a healthy housing industry. There's two key fundamental things, and you said BILD is very focused on both of these. The cost to build has got out of whack. Pro formas are just not working. The market is going to influence some of those factors like construction costs, land costs, material costs, labor costs, for example. But we really need governments to step up and reduce the government fees and taxes that they are putting on construction. And we've seen that in places like Burlington, Mississauga, and Vaughan. We need HST, a hard look at that and that removed. We need speed of approvals. All of those fundamentals that we've been barking up the tree on for the last several years. I'm optimistic that we're beginning to see change, but I really think that we need to accelerate that change. So where I'll agree with you is the uncertainty caused by the chaos, but where I think we can't rely on the removal of that chaos to return us to a healthy market without the structural changes that I've mentioned. So those are the types of comments and conversations that I'm having with the members when I'm hearing from them.
Well, it's clearly congratulations on what happened in Vaughan and Milton in the reduction of DCs, dramatic reduction of DCs. That's a tremendous accomplishment, Dave. And you're to be, we need a new trophy for that. We'll call it the Wilkes DC trophy or something. That's
yeah. I'd have to share the credit on that one.
Well, that's okay. But the key factor is that from a study you produced a couple of years ago, the length of time from the time a builder developer buys a piece of dirt to the time he actually puts a shovel in the ground and begins construction is 10 years. Mm-hmm. This is just unconscionable. And right. I don't know whether or how we get our own Musk going here. I mean, for all of the criticism he receives, you've got to cheer like heck when he delivers on greater efficiency. And our inefficiency in the approval process is unbelievable. You know that I can't take a plan done by one of our builders in Mississauga and I can't get that approved instantly stamped for a permit in Brampton or Durham. You got to go through months and months and months of nonsense for exactly.
And Andy, let me just give you an example. It can be done. There's one of our members, and then I'll turn to my other colleagues here in Durham, where an approval was done in 4 weeks. And that approval was for a townhouse project. It was in the Star, actually. It allowed that particular builder to reduce the cost to the consumer by several $100,000 because you weren't having those delays in the cost. Our colleagues at CHBA do a national benchmarking survey, and there are municipalities like Edmonton, Calgary, London, elsewhere that are well below what the average is in the GTA. So I think there is a cultural change needs to happen, a leadership change needs to happen. I refuse to be pessimistic. I must be optimistic because I see the opportunity beginning. But Tim, I don't know if you see that in the folks that you're talking about. Are they pessimistic as well? Am I naive?
Well, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, David. Let me say off top, Andy, really appreciate what you and your team do here. The PMA-CIBC Summit's always awesome. I love being in the audience, and I'm honored when I have a chance to be on the stage. So thanks for lighting the way on what could be what's a very ominous path ahead. But today's point, I'm also an optimist. So I'll tell you three things as we kick off this discussion. Number one, I was in Washington, D.C., so I'll tell you a bit of what I heard there. Number two, I'll reflect what's happening on uncertainty and answer Dave's question about optimism among realtors. And then three, why I'm optimistic. So Andy, I want to reinforce a couple of things you said. I got to go to Washington, D.C. as part of Premier Ford's Ontario days as a capacity to partner at Counsel Public Affairs with some clients work on both sides of the border. Premier Ford actually outlined kind of the Brethour vision. He called it Fortress Can-Am, where he talked about how we want to get to a place where we can actually lower costs on both sides of the border, grow jobs and investment, have a North American defense if Canada did more of its fair share, and we darn well should invest more in our military by tearing down interprovincial trade barriers, reducing regulation, opening up investment to protected areas. I thought he came across like the kind of statesman that we need. And I think we're going to end up in something like that. what we heard, here's the interesting part, talking to, Republicans, staff, and decision makers there, they almost always said, Andy, we agree with you. We think we should turn our trade guns on China for all the rules they break and be open to Canada. We don't quite get it, but we're not going to speak out about it. Not right now. President Trump's on some momentum. They don't want to stick their head up. They don't want to get primaried and lose their seat. So they're holding back. And the second thing they said was, we're not really sure what the president is after. It's not clear what the negotiating chips are, but I do believe those will fall into place. So there's a reflection, just to reinforce your opening comments, Andy, about the relationship with the states. I brought a slide with me. I'll ask Leanne to pull it up. I spoke at the Buzz Real Estate Conference just 2 weeks ago, and this shows the uncertainty in the market as a result of the Trump thumb. Sorry, I meant the one with the showings, if you don't mind. I spoke at the Buzz conference, developers there, as well as real estate professionals. And I said, well, let's look at showings in the marketplace in January. And again, if we can pull up the other slide that I sent with the showings. Typically, when you're heading, through February and into March, you start seeing an upward movement in showings, which shows interest in real estate. And while that screen's not up right now, it does show we've kind of gone off a cliff, reflecting the uncertainty and then the impact on the marketplace. We had that standalone slide, Leanne?
No, I don't have that one. Sorry, Tim.
Okay.
Yeah, I just had that one.
Okay, we'll go send it around later if you like, Andy. Third part of the why I'm optimistic. Look, in every crisis, there is opportunity. And I do believe that housing has the opportunity here to be the go-to to try to keep our economy above water, because there will be tariffs, I'm confident, for a while. And sure, that will hit an input cost, but it's not an export at the end of the day. And I think this will galvanize a re-elected Premier Ford in the election campaign federally to actually make the long overdue, difficult but necessary decisions to spur housing, to knock down development charges, to speed up the approval process, all the stuff that David and I have championed, and you, Andy. I do think that this gives that window to finally see aggressive action, because we're going to have very little other choice.
Can I build on Tim's comment there, Andy, if I may?
Yeah.
I think it was Winston Churchill, never miss a good crisis, or
There you go.
some version of that. And Tim, I completely agree with you. And I think that's why I'm optimistic as well, because we are beginning to see change, right? We talked about the DCs. We see the Conservative Party of Canada and Liberal leadership candidates talking about HST relief. We are seeing slow but surely approval speed up. And the domestic nature of our industry, combined with the need that we have to build more housing, with things like showings and sales falling off cliffs. There was 347 sales in January in the GTA. Unbelievable. Why bother? So the crisis is there, but we're beginning to see the political will established to make the necessary changes. So I'm repeating what you said, Tim, because I completely agree with it. We know the path forward. We have to address it with a sense of urgency, and I'm beginning to feel momentum to create that change, which will set us up much better for the longer term. So apologies for piling on there, but I that's exactly where my head's at as well.
I'm glad you did. I just throw this back at Tim. What's interesting about the Premier's tremendous, actually, and very positive support for the Ring of Fire and its development. But in fact, the movement by Trump, a deal being signed today with Ukraine on their rare earth minerals, on a approach to Greenland about rare earth minerals. And what do we have in Northern Ontario but some of the greatest supply of rare earth minerals in the world? And what we need, and I think Premier Ford has identified this clearly, is American investment and ingenuity to exploit that. We don't have the capital or the positive support for capital investment in that neighborhood today, and it's something that we could tremendously go for. Is that not really kind of part of the underlying? I think that's a Trumpism, actually.
Yeah, it's for all three of those examples, Andy. I'll just be a quick comment here. There's an expression that you shouldn't take Trump literally, but you should take him seriously. And they're taking over Greenland or throwing the Russians. At the end of the day, he negotiates on the critical minerals. And hopefully there's something like that on the table, because I think actually at the end of the day, it could benefit Canada as well as the States.
What about you, Leor? I saved the best for last because you hardly express any emotion in these
Well,
sessions.
you know, this is sort of a political area that I try and stay out of. You know, my sense is, I mean, Dave Wilkes said it all for me, but the one thing that I think is really important is uncertainty has crushed already a very down market. But once you get some certainty as to what this Trump tariff bullshit is, and it may take 90 days, then we can get on with life. Right now, we can't get on with life because we don't know. We don't have a new premier. You don't have a new prime minister. You have no idea how tariffs are going to work. You got to, like, that uncertainty is huge. But the next 6 months are going to be, they have been brutal. I've seen more bad stuff happening over the last few months than I've seen before. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I think we're near the bottom. And you know, I've been around this industry as long as you, maybe not as long as you have, Andy, but for a long time. And you know, when it's at the bottom, it doesn't take much to turn it. That's the one good thing about real estate, is that you know, on April 22, suddenly it fell off the wagon. It peaked and it died within weeks. And I think the same thing is going to happen in this market. We're going to clear up this uncertainty. We're going to get some more traction. We're going to get a government that's going to say we're going to cut the HST. And then suddenly someone is going to launch a project in Markham. And it's not going to be $1.7 million for a townhouse, or maybe it's not Markham, you know, maybe it's East Gwillimbury. It's going to be 800,000 or 700,000 for a 1,200-foot townhouse, and people will be lined up at that particular site, and it'll be in the Star on a Monday morning. And they're saying, look at this site. Claire Feinstein will finally write something that's more positive than her usual stuff. And that will say, and people say, oh, the market's turned. People are saying, you know, the builder found a way to reduce the cost. Maybe it's phase one of a division of a subdivision that he's making very little money. And that's what's going to turn it. And then 2 weeks later, there'll be another one. I don't know when and how that will happen, but it will happen. And it will happen sometime this year. Probably not until, like I said, all this crap goes away. So it could be the fall. And then suddenly, you know, there will be a turn in confidence. Consumers will say, oh, I better get in there now, because now they're selling stuff and it's going to go up. We know it. We've seen it. It happens. How and when, like I said, I don't know, but there will be some trigger. You know, there have been bad triggers from the government. There'll be a positive one from some government, and some entrepreneurial developer will find a way to get some product out there at a low cost because there is a demand. High rise is an entirely different story that this year is gone. This year is gone for high rise, and like it's the next year probably too is my guess, and I hope I'm wrong, because that's a big part of my business. But low rise, I'm very positive about it in the second half of this year when that thing happens, whatever it is, to turn the psychology, and it will happen.
We've had innovation already. We've had some green shoots. Some of it's ex-urban in Niagara Peninsula from Empire, Treasure in Bowmanville, on the Fringe in Barrie, but also Starlane in Richmond Hill this weekend sold 38 houses at $2 million plus. In really over about a 2-week period. Now, why is it special? It's part of it is the ethnicity. It's a very strong Asian market with a commitment to long-term real estate, but great big square footage on 45-foot lots, I think they were. And we've seen evidence of, I'll throw Zancor out in the East End with a 32-foot single with a 2-car garage. Beautifully designed, terrific house. Really strong market reaction. Multi-generational product coming into the market. Very interesting by Kaivan, by Pinewood, by others who are about to introduce it. You've got product innovation begins to, you know, uncertainty creates creativity. Right. We get some innovation happening, and that's going on. Marshall Homes on the weekend with a 3-level stack at $599 had a lineup. Now he
There you
didn't
go.
sell a ton. He didn't sell a ton, but he didn't release a lot either, kind of testing it, and got some great reaction because it's selling at 600 a foot instead of 900 or 1,000 a foot on a high rise. So we're going to see some really interesting new product innovation coming to the market, but the strength is going to be single family, small lot singles, the move up market, the ability to sell resale. The resale market still has life, and then move up from there. So it's a I'm done at noon. Can I do it at noon?
We gotta get it set it up for.
Tim, you want me to pull that slide up
anyway,
now?
I'm gonna go back and
Sure.
throw it out.
Yeah, thank you.
I apologize. You can maybe go upstairs.
I'm right in the middle of a thing. I'm done in 20 minutes.
Uh-oh.
Sorry, go on. Yep, sorry.
So yeah, I just resent this slide here, Andy. Sorry about earlier. This basically that shows you how uncertainty is hitting the market, today. So typically in this time of year, showings tend to go up, low right around Christmas time. But really, when Trump started talking about the Trump thump, it fell off the cliff. And there it's illustrated with that's GTA showings data. Thank you.
And Andy, can I ask Leor a question? So Leor, I really hope you're right that there's going to be some trigger to create the demand that is not there right now. Do you think that trigger will be enough, or do we need the structural change that I talk about and that I'm obsessed with around, more reduction in costs, relief on HST, speeding up approvals, those things that I can say in my sleep and hopefully I don't. Will we need that change? How necessary is that change in your mind in order to reset the market and get those price points down to a point where the market can observe? Because what I realized, without that adjustment, there's two types of adjustments, right? The market's going to do what the market needs to do on materials, et cetera. And we are seeing, as I understand from the members, some moderating of that. But without political leadership to create the other change that I talk about, we're still not going to get to a price point where no matter how much uncertainty is gone, it's still going to be too expensive, despite some of the examples that Andy mentioned. I'm curious from your point of view.
Well, yeah, when I say there's going to be a trigger point, that's usually a trigger point that comes with a whole slew of other things that have been happening before then. It's not on its own, but you'll have had, like I said, perhaps your government's coming in, announcing HST cuts, more DC cuts in an area where where someone is launching. You need that combination, but any one of those may not be enough, but they'll build. And then it will reach a point, and you'll get rid of the uncertainty from Trump, and you'll get the positive vibes from perhaps a conservative government or perhaps a Carney government that's housing focused. So you build that confidence, and then you have that sort of that trigger of that launch in some place where there's lineups. It's not going to be that'll be the end of it, but you need all the other things some other things to happen to create that positive environment to add that final sort of straw to the fire, and then you have it. So you're right, it can't happen on its own, and but I think those things will happen, but it will take. We're looking at 2 months, 3 months for Trump and governments and activity. So that's why I'm thinking the fall is going to be a potential time for that to happen, and to see. I have clients that have been holding off launches or that launched and failed, that are looking to do it. They're looking to do it this spring. Personally, I'm pleased, but I think it's too early. But I think the fall, if we get the right traction, there's that demand. It's really the pricing, the pricing and but also the psychology. The psychology is not there.
Leor, what areas of deregulation do we need? Like you spend your life buried in legal agreements, laying on more and more. Not you, but perhaps municipality or otherwise, laying on greater and greater regulation. What areas can we eliminate?
Well, just the timing to get through basic things, getting a condominium approvals, I deal with the back end of things. And everybody's so different. And like you said, one municipality does it this way, then one municipality does it this way. You get new municipalities who don't know what they're doing because they haven't done a condo before. I don't know what the answer is to get some best practices. If Markham has a great process for getting that. Why don't we all learn from that? Like, why is everybody trying to do things separately? That's what, and that time kills, right? I have a project, it's been killed because it's 4 months, dealing with, silliness. That 4 months is money. And then, and so BILD has tried for years to try and get that best practices. Maybe, now that we're seeing DCs coming down, maybe they, everybody can get off their high horse and say, if Oakville is doing it right, let's do it the Oakville way. We don't care, just because they all have to say, this is the way we do things. And I'm so tired of whether it's the legal department or the planning department saying, this is the way we do things, this is the way it is, this is the way we did the last one. Everyone is totally afraid of being creative or looking for efficiencies, because quite frankly, there's nothing in it for those civic officials. There's no incentive and there's no benefit, and it's only a downside if they deviate from the way it's supposed to be done.
You know what it is? It's a cultural change.
Right.
It's getting to yes as to getting to, oh, I don't know, I need to look at this one more time. And Andy, I don't think it's any more, and that requires, it's a theme that we've talked about here. Leadership that creates certainty and movement, as opposed to leadership that creates uncertainty. So, the examples out in Durham and elsewhere, it's not, people know how to do this. It's just that cultural and that leadership and that commitment to getting to yes. Or if your project is wrong, let people know quickly so you can fix it. I don't really think it's how do we do it? It's a desire to do it that I would
when we know you're in a real and serious crisis for housing supply, will Premier Ford, assuming he's reelected today with a new mandate, which has been existential to pointing towards the US threat. But at the same time, Tim, do you think Ford will have the fortitude to impose from the province on municipalities standards, cut through the red tape, move product faster, quicker? Does he have that inclination?
Yes. I gave one reason. I think there's going to be no choice, because you need housing to be stronger, given the slowdown we experience from export-based products. But let me tell you the other reason, Andy, and if it's okay with you, I got a couple of slides from a recent poll on housing that we did at Counsel Public Affairs. Could I pull those up?
Yes.
All right, thanks, man. I appreciate that. Now, here's your number two reason is going to have to. So we did a survey of over 1,500 Ontarians with Leger, and here's what we found out when it comes to the biggest issues in the province. So here's where Ford is, right? Solid win. We'll see tonight. But what's interesting, Andy, is despite those numbers, here are the top issues in the province. Is actually, what are people concerned about? Healthcare is number one, cost of living, jobs and economy. Housing is number 4 on the list, which is still quite strong. This whole Trump tariff thing is number 5 on the list. So this tells you a bit about the housing background, particularly sensitive in these areas. Our next slide talks about regions and type of people, where housing is sort of off the scale on level of concern. The next slide will tell you a little bit why we're heading the direction we are. So the red is bad, right? That is people who think that performance has been unsatisfactory, very unsatisfactory. Blue is good. Housing, the Ford government completely underwater. More than 51% think he's doing a bad job on it compared to a good job. Right up there with health and cost of living. But underlying that slide, the next one will show you, again, regional divides on that, where it's the hottest issue in the province and what types of voters. The reason Ford is still winning is in this next slide that tells you, well, who's best to handle this crisis? So around housing, Ford is actually still, despite that low rating, seen as the best premier to try to fix it. Now, the biggest answer is nobody, or it can't be solved. But the reason Ford's going to win is because of the discipline of the focus on protecting Ontario, but also because nobody else is seen as solving those other issues that are out there in the woodwork. And then just to conclude, there's our company. You can see more of it at counselpublicaffairs.com. So the point I'm making is housing is such an underlying issue. And if interest rates when they come down further, the pent-up demand that my colleagues have talked about, you cannot ignore it when you are experiencing that in government. Wasn't a big election issue for the reasons I explained, but man, it's going to be a big government issue through the rest of 2025. Doug Ford will have a strengthened mandate of historic proportions. I think he's going to get fever again on housing. I think he's going to start saying to municipalities, I'll reward you if you hit the speeding up approvals and you hit targets. But if you don't, I'm going to crack down and bring in the stick. I'll take that power away from you. I will override it. He has such strength in his mandate. The issue is going to bubble up even further. I'm confident you see Doug Ford with a lot of fever to get homes built for those two reasons.
I would
suggest, though, I would suggest he fumbled the Greenbelt issue badly with a process that was maligned and an end result that, of course, meant that these artificial boundaries became sacrosanct. Does he have, do you believe then that he really will not, will he go back again to a review of some of those Greenbelt boundaries? Will he have the fortitude to mess with that? It's that there's the cornerstone of supply instantly. Add water and stir with services right on its boundary.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll throw that out back to you, Tim. Does he, will he touch?
I'll say no on green belt, definitely white belt, yellow belt, but he will stay away from the green belt. But he's going to put his foot back on the accelerator because they eased off. They had the green belt scandal, right? It's a terrible, terrible process. They didn't want to turn off too many mayors, so they backed away. But now that he's got he's going to have more seats, and he's going to have more seats. This is even better than Leslie Frost in the 1950s. That's going to give him the gas in the tank to just keep plowing through when it comes to housing. And if I were a municipality, I'd line up to say, I'm on board and give you some funding for my, my sewer project, my highway, whatever. But he's going to go down this path, I'm confident.
Yeah. And the path I think is going to go down, Andy, investment in infrastructure, but investment in infrastructure, money through whatever fund. And I'm hopeful that this path is the one he does. A commitment to look at your DCs and change them. We released a paper a couple weeks ago, just by looking at a utility model, as is done in Quebec and Texas and Florida and elsewhere, for water and wastewater, and calculating the land needs within DCs accurately, as opposed to forecasting the amount of land need, the actual land that you need to build roads and libraries and community services. You could reduce DCs by 50%. Just by making those two changes, according to the paper we released. So what we're hopeful of, and Tim, I sure hope you're right, because if you're not, there's no other time that you will be right, unfortunately, given the crisis that we have and the mandate that this government is expected to get. We'll invest in infrastructure, pipes. We'll give you money for change, but under the condition that you change the way you calculate DCs and under the condition that you expedite approvals to at least the national average. I'm making up the examples. I think it's going to be a with but, and I think it'll be a carrot approach, not a stick approach, because the stick approach didn't work last time. That'd be my 2 cents.
I'm going to add one quick lesson I could, Andy, and what Dave just said. Let's not sit back though, right? Like the reason things have moved is because there has been a coalition, a team of people pushing on these issues. I loved working with Dave when I was at the Ontario Real Estate Association. We cannot give up. We got to be full throttle, a united voice. Don't take this for granted, right? Because some other lobbies we're looking at some other issue to put in the spotlight. We just got to keep pushing until the job is done.
Yep.
I just found a real disconnect with our national counterparts. I found a disconnect between the federal and provincial levels. This may be history, and then maybe it's water under the bridge, and this is about to change. But it, as Dave points out, leadership requirement in all levels, but particularly the federal level, in a cooperative venture with the province and the municipalities. We've been, looking for more political advantage than we have been looking for how do I improve infrastructure supply and financing of projects. It's got to be a cooperative effort, Dave. Is our national association doing a better job? I don't hear from them. You're taking over from what I'm seeing.
I can't comment on that.
Oh, I guess you can't.
I'll leave people like Leor Margulies, who is on our board, to comment on that. But let me talk about what I see politically, federally. And I talked about this earlier. HST, Pierre Poilievre, exempting for $1 million and below, and he said publicly that in markets like the GTA, maybe that's not enough, and they need to take a hard look at that. You've seen Carney as part of his housing plan, HST relief for first-time homebuyers. For the first time since 1991, when it's putting in, this conversation is a real one. You saw Carney in his housing plan as well, talking about the need to invest in infrastructure with the conditions that I've talked about. You see Polyev talking about the need to reform DCs. These are active conversations federally, provincially, and municipally. I haven't been doing this job as long as anybody else on this phone, but in the time that I've been doing it, never before have we seen actual movement, which is the basis of my optimism. But there's still not enough, and we need to do exactly what you said, Andy. Infrastructure money, federally and provincially, has to be tied to municipal change. Without that, we're done. And I'll leave it as simple as that. And that's what BILD will continue to focus on. As soon as this election is over later today, we're going to be on the doorstep with those solutions and reintroducing them as we had before the election was called, and going publicly with that message that with the mandate that we're assuming this government is getting, do something.
Leor, the high-rise game is really in life support. Mortgage delinquencies have doubled. Now they're still very low, very, very low, but it's doubled. We've got 24,000 units to be delivered this year orders were taken in 2021, another 25,000 units in 2026. The size of the supply isn't going to diminish anytime soon. And in fact, we're seeing it in listing supply on MLS on what now becomes a resale at significant numbers, surging supply. What can we do to resuscitate the high-rise business?
If I had that answer, I wouldn't be here. I'd be somewhere, and on a throne, dishing out favors. I mean, look, with all due respect, the industry has built to what they thought the demand was, and the demand on the high-rise side was driven substantially by the investor market, and the investor market found that small units, even though per square foot they're a little higher, was the best investment. They got the best return. So and people were still, there was a demand given students, people moving to the city and immigrants for one bedrooms. So now what we have is a plethora of wrong supply. Not like we have too much one bedrooms. Those don't sell. If you have a two bedroom, you have a shot at selling it. And until we can get to a price point where you can actually build things that people actually want to live in, I think, we have a real problem. And I don't think it's going to change. And to be quite frank, I've been looking at all the approvals and entitlements that have been going on, particularly in Toronto and the surrounding areas. There's a huge number of entitlements given the change in the provincial legislation and the attitude of the city of Toronto in particular, which was anti-high-rise forever. And now every corner you get 60 stories. Well, that's great, but those aren't ever going to get built. And they're not going to get built because people aren't going to buy one-bedroom units. So I think there has to be a fundamental change in the marketplace. That density is great. But I have clients that are scaling back from 50 stories to 37 stories, and now everyone's converting to rental. And rental isn't the answer because you've got to get enough rents to build it, and the cost is still too high, and rents are coming down, and you won't get $4 or $5 a foot. So, do I have an answer? No. I think there has to be a fundamental shift and a fundamental shift in cost. Until you can bring those high rises down so we can get two bedrooms that people can live in, as opposed to investors is simply buying and hoping to get small micro units. I hate to be pessimistic. I can't see how we're going to really resuscitate things. And then you've told me, I knew about this year being a big year for completions. I know last year was a huge year. I didn't realize that next year is going to be a huge year. So we had a tremendous supply of the wrong product. There has to be a fundamental shift, and you're going to see those buildings are going to come down. No one, those 60 stories are going to come down to 30 or 15. But or maybe they can't because their land cost is too high. And so until then, we're going to get stuck with a lot of entitlements.
Can I,
with a
can I,
with a CPA.
I always like to be positive because I read your
Yeah.
caption on your emails, Andy. You know, some of the things that we've seen done in Mississauga, exempting 2 bedrooms, DCs for 2 bedrooms, 35% reduction in property tax for purpose built. Those are the things that need to become universal.
True.
I couldn't agree more. We got a lot of the wrong product. And also, as you look at the demographics, and there's a report coming out on this next week, I believe, the demographics are shifting to people wanting either at-grade housing because more family formation, or larger apartments / condos. So the market is shifting to where that product isn't. We need to have policy shift to promote that. And that also comes from a low-rise point of view. I know we're talking high-rise, Andy, but pipes in the ground. Sorry for that.
I just threw it out because I think there's a great opportunity to lift the prohibition on foreign ownership. This was a politically motivated. It was never a significant part of our market, perhaps 3 to 5%, but it would be very, very helpful on small unit investment when the dollar's at 68 cents from particularly the US investor, or perhaps other areas from around the world, particularly into our major urban areas of the city of Toronto and the city of Vancouver, where we have this overhang of inventory. And let us clean that up, because it would provide significant rental supply and instantly, and is a way to stimulate the high-rise demand again to some degree. A small little lift, but something that could easily be done with the cross of a pen.
Yeah, I think, Andy, that's a brilliant idea, because if I was a government, I would still keep the foreign buyer the tax on the low-rise stuff, because we don't want, to be honest, if I'm a politician, I don't want guys coming in there soaking up houses that people need to live in because, you know, for speculation. But on the high-rise side, it's an investment. We got too much of it. Let them buy. You know, will it stimulate? It will help. So I think that's an easy thing for them all to do.
Yeah.
Let me flip it to, sorry, let me flip to Chris.
I'll be the skunk of the garden party here on this one. I just have never seen an issue turn around so quickly as immigration, where, you know, so many Canadians, pro-immigration, and then all of a sudden it came pro-immigration, and now it's really negative. So I just think it's too radioactive. I get the logic. It was always, what, 3% or so on average of purchases in Ontario. Yeah. I just think it's too hot right now, Andy. Maybe a few years down the road, but I think there's got to be a quid pro quo that the average Canadian will accept, which maybe you're going to buy one of these places, you got to give back somewhere else, build more homes, build businesses. But I think I would put this lower on the collective list for at least 3 years.
Okay, appreciate it. Everyone, fantastic. We're running up against the clock, and I'm about to get kicked out of my little office here. I just, Chris, questions, or Leanne, questions from the audience. I know there's lots, and we've got about 5 minutes. What have we got out there on the question floor?
We do. We've actually had a lot of good commentary and behind the scenes as well. But a couple that I just wanted to highlight. This one would be good for you, Dave. It's from Mr. Moss out in the audience. The current DC reductions by leading municipalities, short term, ? Will they last ? How do we convince municipalities that DCs are in fact out of line? Apologies.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly the reductions we've seen are temporary. That's why we've added to our focus how you change them structurally, and I outlined our recommendations around that. We need those structural changes so that we don't need these temporary reliefs. And so that will be the focus, is to looking at different ways to fund the investments that are necessary for growth that maintain the financing municipalities are great, but not at the expensive level that it currently is. So if I summarize, and I'm trying to go faster, DCs are necessary. They've inflated, particularly in the GTA, too high. We need a different method so that temporary relief isn't required. And that's what we're working on.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you. And I'd like to thank everyone out in the audience for taking part, as you do so frequently, and for all of your support. Thanks to the panel for these ideas and insights. We are going to do our draw This time around, we're giving away a few copies of this book, Unreasonable Hospitality. And the concept is above and beyond. And now's the time for above and beyond. What are those little things, those little extras we can do for our customers to make us memorable and to repeat business and to refer business? So there's going to be 2 members of our audience, and everyone on the panel will also be sent a book. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The first winner is, these are very small ballots today.
You're getting old.
Yeah, Tina Makuso. So Tina, congratulations.
Who's Tina with? Who's Tina with?
I only have a Gmail address. Apologies.
Oh, okay.
And then our second one here is a blank. All right, that is really, really small. Here we go. Brian Moss. Coincidence.
Woo!
Brian, thanks so much for your question this morning.
That was rigged.
Thanks very much to our CIBC, our title sponsor, and Leanne and the team over at McHewitt. You're great partners along the way over the last 5 years. Thank you. Everyone, we'll see you next month. We have a whole year ahead of us of amazing insights, amazing panels, and amazing topics to unpack. So please come back. If you're joining us on YouTube, please hit the like button so this gets circulated throughout the internet even more than it already is. Have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Vote
you,
early
Chris.
and often. Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Bye.
Dave. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Leor.
vote.
Thanks, Chris.
You're very welcome. Take care,
Live
everyone.
positive.